Hello everybody, welcome back to the Howarth Timber and Building Supplies 1840 podcast. I'm your host Paul Bullivant, and today we're going to be delving into the dark art of renewables, and in particular air source heat pumps. And to help us in that conversation, I'm delighted to welcome our guests from Tuplins, Tim Whitehead, the Managing Director, and Jim Stafford, the Renewables Technical Manager. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul.
And I'm also joined by my colleague for a second visit in 2 weeks, John Houston. Welcome back, John.
Cheers.
So, let's get started with some introductions. So, our viewers know who we're talking to. Jim.
Yeah.
Introduce yourself.
Yeah, Jim Stafford. Been in the industry now 22 years, just about that. Started out as a plumbing and heating engineer. 5 or 6 years doing that before I moved over to a manufacturer specialising in underfloor heating. Spent just short of 16 years there and then moved over to Tuplins.
Just to name them?
I can do, yeah. Polypipe Building Products. Yeah, I worked through pretty much every role in underfloor heating you can think of there, starting out as a designer, ending up as technical manager in the commercial arm of the underfloor heating business before moving on to Tuplins just over 2 years ago now.
Okay.
And taking up the technical manager role with Tim, working under Tim.
And that's across all renewables?
Across all,
as
renewables, underfloor heating, MVHR, air source heat pumps, obviously, etc.
Excellent.
Been there 2 years and 4 months now.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Tim, over to you.
So, e-Tupling family business. I joined the business in 2009 in a business development sales role to develop what we knew was going to be an area that we needed to be stronger in, which was underfloor heating renewables. Assumed role as managing director through that process. We've split the business now so that we're e-Tupling distribution and Heat-Uplink, which is the underfloor heating and renewables arm, which is what I'm leading as we move forward.
So it's your business, you're part of the family?
I'm part of the family, yeah. The Tupling name's my maternal grandfather's name. So we're technically a third generation family business now, and we're just evolving and moving forward with that now.
Nice. You joined in 2009. What's the backstory to you before then?
Before that, I was very much in recruitment. I had a history in that post university. Did a business degree and came out of university and got into recruitment. So for me, it was the opportunity to join the family business was a natural progression. Mm-hmm. Wasn't something I did straight out of university because I suppose I cut my teeth, if you like, in the industry because I recruited back into the industry, QS, site managers. Mm-hmm. So the whole people side and, that side of the business was quite something I was quite comfortable with when I joined the business.
Had you worked in the business kind of as you went through school?
I did deliveries in the back of a van to various merchants all across Lancashire. All through summer holidays and through university. Yeah,
that's a good start to a career.
Absolutely, all sorts of earache doing that as well. Paul.
Why did you? What did you do at uni?
Did a business degree.
Business degree, okay.
Yeah.
And then why did you decide not to go straight into the family business?
Because really it was evolving at the time. 1966 was when it was incorporated. It began in 1966, so we're proud of the fact that we're 60 years next year. But really, my father Ian got involved in 2001.
Okay.
I came out of university in 96 and, we'd had a conversation about the business at that point, but he was quite wise. You should go and cut your teeth somewhere else, learn a bit about the working world and learn a bit about business.
Yeah.
And we started discussing it in 2007, 2008, and we went from there, really.
Oh, that's excellent. While we're talking about the history of the business, do you want to go right back to the start of the business and your grandfather?
Yeah, so he is Ernest e-Tupling. That's the business, e-Tupling and Son. So my grandfather, he started the business in 1966. He worked all the way through with his son, which was Bob, R.H. Tupling. They did that pretty much selling product that was popular at the time into the merchanting side of the industry. Pure distribution still, buying in off the manufacturer, breaking bulk and selling on. But it was very much, flues, radiators, asbestos, and anything else really. A proper trading. If the merchant wanted something, Tuplins would find it for you. So that worked as a good model. And as we discussed before we started the podcast today, things evolve very, very quickly and have done more so in the last 20 years. So from 2001 onwards, father got involved. 2009, I got involved. 2013, my sister got involved because we needed a lot more financial direction in what we were doing. And then there was a conscious decision from myself really in 2015-16 that the sort of soulless agreement we had with one particular manufacturer who we have a great relationship with to this day, which was Polypipe Building Products. We just needed to add some more strings to our bow to make sure that the independent market had access to everything that they needed. Because let's be honest about it, if we didn't provide that, they were going to buy it from somewhere else.
Can I ask what? So when business first started, it was distribute anything into the plumbing and heating industry.
Pretty much, yes.
But then over time, it kind of morphed into just doing Polypipe.
Yeah, it was a case of really from the mid-80s in the early days before Polypipe became Polypipe. And it was, you know, I think it's fair to say that their business model has evolved from what was coming in as a price-fighting brand, and they evolved into the leading brand in the UK market. We'd sell everything we could. And then probably from the mid-90s, it became a soulless agreement where we would just represent Polypipe and sell it into their accounts.
So just taking you back then into the 80s, as soon as you mentioned it, when we were talking about the history of Tuplings, while we were planning this, you very kindly sent us a picture over an advert from in the 80s.
I did.
Which we've got up on the screen now for the viewers to see. Do you want to talk to us about it?
Yeah, I mean, again, as we said before, this looks very much like it was taken in the 1930s. But this was the way that the business marketed and advertised what he did, and there was one of our old general managers on the picture there. There's a recognisable insulation brand on the picture that we still sell to this day. But that's exactly what we've been. You know, our heritage has been true in that we've been a stockist and distributor to the plumbing, heating and building trades, but that's morphed very much into what we all understand as a true independent merchant market now.
The other thing that struck me when I opened it up when you first sent me it was that smock coat.
Yeah.
Because every builder's merchant in the world, staff wore smock coats, didn't they?
I think that's synonymous with trade counter.
Yeah.
I think it's that, this person knows what they're doing. If they've got one of those coats on, speak to them. They'll guide you.
I wonder when they stopped. Because there must have been a time when everybody thought, hang on a minute.
Well, my father's still involved with the business now, and he still
wears it.
He doesn't wear it. I've stopped him wearing it, Paul, but he's still got one.
Why have you stopped him wearing it?
Because it probably needs a wash, and it's a bit threadbare.
I was just about to say it's white, so it won't stay white for very long.
No, it's not white, and maybe we shouldn't be wearing white coats in the distribution.
Yes.
But that's what we are in terms of the business. What it does and its route to market hasn't changed. Just the product mix has changed.
It was such a great picture when you sent me it, and it just brought back so memories to me of an 18-year-old starting my first job, getting your smock coat on, pockets full of pads and pens and fittings and tape measures
and O-rings
and that's it, and all stuff that you'd accumulate. And it was a real blast from the past.
We discussed nostalgia, didn't we, Paul?
Yeah.
And the importance of that family business, that independent business. So we're quite proud of that.
You should be.
Yeah.
We really enjoy all the story. As we've done these podcasts, I think this is episode 18 that we've recorded, and it's just all those little stories that make you laugh and joke and think back into the past about it. So thanks for sending that in.
No, not at all. Thanks for sharing it.
That was spot on. What's the future then for Tuplings? Where are you? You've just kind of split the business into two now. Have you got an eye on the future, what it might look like?
Yeah, I mean, really, we started really thinking long and hard about development and growth in sort of 2017, and we're 3 shareholder directors now. We're trying to grow our teams. We're very focused on distribution, customer services, breaking bulk, off the shelf, and being true to what we are as a manufacturer's distributor. We want to be perceived in the market as a distributor that will give our independent merchant the products that either they can or cannot access from the manufacturer, or if they just want smaller volumes and simplified process. But what part of what we go on to talk to today, and what Jim's heavily involved with the business now, is it's this simplification of this journey we're all on into this renewables market. So what we've tried to do there is we've said eTupling is the distribution brand, and we've set up Heatupling. And I smile when I say that because it was quite an obvious choice.
I'm going to try and get me to say that.
It's not an aspirate H, but it's a play on words. It's quite obvious. We need to make sure that our merchant client base, which we will never move from, that's our route to market, has access to a project solution, which is always going to be, whether it's new build or refurbishment, we're now in a market where the building trade or the plumbing contractor wants an air source heat pump as a heat source. As Part L changes, MVHR, mechanical ventilation, will become more dominant in that part of the market as well. But the underfloor heating side, where Jim's been tremendously influential with our design, is a case of how do we give our independent merchant partner the package that is the market leading brand that they know, so we don't have to oversell something because we're comfortable with warranties and everything else, but also make sure that we can turn it around on a distribution service package, quick turnaround, we've got it in stock, you can have it tomorrow, we can do a design for you, and also let the merchant compete on price with an online retailer. We've got to do that.
How do those two parts of the business, e-toppling
Yeah.
for distribution and
Yeah.
heat
Yeah.
toppling for
Yeah.
the renewable side
Yeah.
of things, they need two different service packages. So
Yes, they do.
e-toppling is about breaking bulk service, generally, I guess, small quantities quickly.
Correct.
Heat toppling is about it's about expertise, it's about guidance, it's about service where Jim and the team come in.
Yeah.
How are you finding giving two different kind of services to your customers?
Well, it's very much in its infancy because we've kind of launched it over recent events within the industry, within the 40s buying group, and we talked about it at NBS last week in Coventry. What we believe is right, and how we're finding it is that the merchant still wants that support. A trade counter is typically very, very good at what it does and has to react to the demand that's in front of it. What we want our independent merchants to do, and some do it really well, you guys do it well, you give us those leads. We want to take that problem away from you and say, you concentrate on what you've got to sell to that customer that's in front of you here and now. Take the plans off them and let us sell something back into you. You can add value to your customer. They're not going to go somewhere else and they can buy the heat pump, MVHR and underfloor package. It's in its infancy. We're marketing it. We're separating how the business puts that forward, and we'll keep you posted.
Excellent. Good stuff. So, as I said, when we were doing this planning, scripts and plans often go out of the window, and Tim's jumped straight ahead of our plan and ruined your massive introduction, John. Would you care to reintroduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm John Houston. I'm the plumbing and heating category manager for Howarth Timber and Building Supplies. I've worked for Howarth Timber for coming up to 11 years now. My background is very much merchants. I've worked for independents and also national merchants in varying levels of responsibility. Now I'm here at Howarth Timber. I've thoroughly enjoyed my time. Plumbing and heating has grown brilliantly within a predominantly timber merchant. So I'm quite proud of that. And I'm quite proud that, we've got suppliers with us today to talk about renewables.
Excellent. Good to have you on here. So, if we've got you here to be our renewables experts,
Yep.
I think we need to demonstrate to our audience that you know what you're talking about.
Yep.
Would that be fair?
That's fair.
Of course.
John, would that be fair?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I've got some quiz questions to really test your knowledge.
Okay, thanks,
Okay.
Paul.
You'll like these. Jim, this is going to be the first one to you
Go on.
because it's about underfloor heating.
Yep.
Okay, you ready?
I'm ready, yeah.
Which civilization invented the first underfloor heating system? Was it A, the Romans, B, the Koreans, or C, the Chinese?
So yeah, it was the Romans. Technically, they used to light fires under the floor. Okay. So big ducts under the floor, light a fire at one end, it would draw the heat under the floor and come out the other side.
Excellent. That's wrong, unfortunately. Excuse the crowd heckling in the background. According to Chat AI,
Yeah.
and we can't argue with AI, the actual answer was the Koreans.
Okay.
And apparently, underfloor heating has a long history, with its earliest forms appearing around 5000 BC in Korea with the Ondol system, where heat from a fire, so your half right, was channeled under stone floors, eventually refined to include ovens as well.
Okay.
So you're kind of half right.
I didn't know that either.
No,
Paul.
I didn't. And you have to blame ChatGPT.
ChatGPT
and AI.
will be having
so I'm not-
words.
I'm not
We were
picking
present 5,000 BC,
I
weren't
don't
we?
know.
Yeah.
Or AI. You can't argue with AI.
No, you can't.
Jim, after that explanation, I'd stick with what you were saying.
Yeah, I'll better
Every
go.
day.
I'll have to go now.
Right, question 2. We'll do this to. We'll do this to John.
Over to you, Jim.
No, John, I said, not Jim. Jim's messed his up.
I've got 0% chance now.
Right,
John,
question
so.
2. What year was the first heat pump built? Was it 1852, 1855, or 1945?
I'm going to say 1945.
Okay. That's another totally incorrect answer. It was, in fact, 1855, believe
Wow.
it or not. Okay. That leads us on to question 3.
Did it work? That's the
Couldn't
thing.
acknowledge this.
Well, do they work now?
Well,
we'll answer that in a
yeah,
minute.
we'll answer that in a
Question
minute.
3, which we'll have to come to Tim. Who was it that built the first heat pump system? Was it A. Peter von Rittinger, B. Lord Kelvin, or C. John Summer?
I'm so comfortable. I'm not that comfortable giving an answer. I'm going to go with A.
Peter von
Yes.
Rittinger. Brilliant.
Easy for
well
you
done,
to
you
say,
see.
Paul.
No, that's, it's easier to say than heat toppling. So it was Peter von Rittinger. Would you care to expand with your vast knowledge of Peter von Rittinger?
Absolutely not, Paul, if you don't mind. It was a sensible guess. Thank you very much.
So Peter was an Austrian pioneer of mineral processing, and in 1855 he recognised the principle of the heat pump while conducting experiments on the use of water vapour's latent heat for the evaporation of salt brine. As a result, in Austria, the heat pump was used to dry salt in salt marshes.
Incredible.
So there, we've properly educated the audience
Absolutely.
with that. One final question, which bringing us a little bit more up to date, which I found interesting, which can go to the 3 of you. How many, again, it's from Google, so if you disagree with the number, you have to take it up with Google. How many heat pumps were sold in the UK in 2024? 20,000, 50,000 or 100,000?
My guess would be 20,000.
I think we're somewhere in the middle on that,
Yeah,
to be quite honest. I'll
I
probably
was
go with
thinking 50.
50. But according to Google, it was 100,000.
Right, okay.
Which seemed a lot to me. I was out, I was
Just to me.
expecting that 20 to 50,000. And it also said there's a target of 450,000 per year by 2030 to meet
That's right.
climate targets.
Yeah, that's right.
Interesting. Right, so we've really proved that we're the experts on the renewables and the
You've
air
opened
source
that up
heat pumps.
nicely there, Paul. Thanks for that.
I told you, trust me. I'll set you up a treat with it. Right, on to the questions that you will.
The trouble is, you're never going to get a customer come to the counter and ask them sort of questions. So we've got
Yeah, okay.
nothing to worry about.
It's all about depth.
Well,
and
you
breadth
might
of
now,
knowledge.
John, because you
Yeah,
just
that's right,
broadcasted
yeah.
to your
Yeah,
audience.
historical expert.
Yeah.
Right, so next part I want to do is I want to talk about some of the myths that there are around air source heat pumps in particular. So what we've done is we went out to some of our colleagues and asked them the kinds of questions or things that they know about air source heat pumps, and we're looking, well, a historian here may struggle. We're looking to you two experts to debunk some of these myths, if you could. So number 1, can this myth be, is this a myth or can it be debunked? Air source heat pumps are too expensive to buy.
Shall I take that one on?
You
Jim, or
take
do
that one, yeah.
I'll take that one. So, how debunking the myth.
Well, is it a myth? And if it is, how would you debunk it?
Okay, so they are not too expensive to buy. It depends what you're drawing comparison against and what you are trying to achieve. So it's relative. Particular, without going into too much detail that we might come on to later, there is opportunity within the government structure now for an end user, consumer, developer, whoever it might be within that, to get support through a boiler upgrade scheme to buy the product competitively and be rewarded through a grant for investing in, renewable technology. So they're not too expensive in that respect. If you're doing a straight comparison with a replacement boiler and there's nothing else going on with the project, then like for like on a piece of paper, yes, they can look more expensive. Agreed.
And how would people access those grants?
To access that grant, it's a process of basically making sure you're talking through a contractor installer who's MCS registered, or talking to someone like ourselves or a renewable supplier, who can basically support that end user through the whole process. But it's a consultancy job. Someone's not going to get all those answers by just looking for a heat pump on Google.
Yeah, fine. Okay, that's good. Jim, this one's for you.
Yeah.
They're too noisy.
Yeah, so we can debunk that straight away. I think the best way to describe them is a whisper on a quiet day.
Yeah.
When they're running at full tilt, you
Yeah.
can stand by one, have a conversation, you won't hear it. We deal with Panasonic. They've got a training van. People regularly get in the van when the heat pump's running at full tilt and they've got no idea it's on. So yeah, the decibels, they're about 30, 40 decibels at the very most on full tilt.
Okay. Where has that myth come from? Do you know?
Historically, some have been noisy, but it's when there's been an issue with the fan. So if they're not quite sat on a level plane, the fan can be tilted and it can cause a vibration on the spindle as it turns. So that's one of the main reasons.
So where they have been noisy, it's not some. It's more.
Yeah, the older
wobble
ones did
than
have a
wobble
there
and
was
vibration.
Yeah, generally that's where it comes from. The older heat pumps, if you're talking 20 years ago, they were a bit more. I'm not going to call them noisy; they were louder. That's all I'll say. So yeah, it's a definite myth.
Okay, that's good. Do you want to answer one, or are we leaving it with the experts?
Experts.
Good choice.
One thing I will say though is that about the noise thing is that air source heat pumps, because they look like an air conditioning unit, they're compared to being the same thing. And air conditioning units are a little bit more noisier than an
they
air
can
source
be.
heat pump.
And lots
So
of
when
that's-
someone sees something noisy, they just assume it's an air conditioning unit.
Yep.
Fine, okay. Right, third one. They don't heat up radiators very well. Tim.
Okay, so depending on the type of radiator, then that can be true. And again, comes back to size of radiator, surface area, conductivity, steel, aluminium, and questions like that. So you can't debunk it perfectly, because if you put a heat pump in with a radiator system that was installed in the mid-80s or 90s, you could potentially have an issue with flow, temperature, and a number of different issues. But if it's designed, if it's put on new build or retrofit, and you've addressed all the issues that you need to address with the type of radiator products, then they work perfectly.
Yeah. If I could just butt into that, it's about the size of the heat emitter. Okay. It's not necessarily about the size of the heat pump. So in theory, you can put a heat pump anywhere, providing the heat emitter, i.e. underfloor heating, radiators, etc., is large enough to cope with that heat. So they are going into stately homes as part of the National Trust at present, and they're working perfectly fine.
Excellent. Next one for you then, Jim. They're expensive to run.
If they're installed correctly, they're going to be significantly cheaper than a boiler.
Okay.
2 to 3 times cheaper on average if you're running bills monthly.
Yeah.
If they're not fitted into the correct environment, i.e. the heat emitters aren't big enough, the pipe sizing is not correct, then yes, they can become more expensive to run than a boiler. So it's all about making sure they're fitted into the right building and the right work's undertaken to make sure that you get the correct flow rates, correct delta T's, correct temperatures.
Okay. So the keys to making them work right are the right size of heat emitter,
Yeah.
pipe sizing,
Yeah.
insulation.
Insulation, yeah. So there's the fabric first is the principle, i.e. insulate before you do anything heating wise. However, we know in some instances that's not always the case. You can't do that for, you can't get the heat, get the insulation onto the walls, etc. So yeah, we would always say fabric first, but you can put a heat pump in if you're uninsulated, i.e. stately homes, solid stone buildings, providing the emitter's big enough, it's fine.
Okay, that's good.
I think most of the systems are bespoke systems, though.
They
aren't
are,
They're not.
yes.
It's not one system fits all, is it?
No.
So, and that's the danger that some developers drop into. That
Yeah.
it's one system fits all, and it's not. They're very much bespoke, and they need to be. Yeah, you need that level of competence to actually put one together.
There's one thing that throws a lot of people, and that's the sizing of a heat pump.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the typical size of a heat pump, if you took a 3-4 bed detached property, it's between 7 and 9 kilowatts. If you went into the equivalent building with a gas boiler, there's more often than not, there'll be a 30 kilowatt boiler on the wall. And that's because we've gone through a process of about 20 years where we're significantly oversizing.
Oversized.
And that's causing several of the issues because people are used to putting that size on. When they see a heat pump design come back at 7 or 9 kilowatts, automatically in your head you think, well, I can't heat that property. In most instances, it'll heat it and have a bit of capacity left over.
Yeah, good point.
Just going off piece slightly, because I'm looking at that at the picture from 1980
okay.
and the smock coat. The other thing I remember from that time is the Mears calculator.
I used to use one.
And you were just talking about oversizing, and I was thinking, how out was a Mears calculator?
Massively, if you look at it. Yeah. And I got taught to use a Mears calculator by my dad when I started in the industry plumbing.
How much do you reckon they were out then?
Probably 50 to 60% minimum.
How much do you think?
Probably more, if you really sat down and dialed
What
into
a
it.
wholly accurate piece of
Yeah.
kit.
But,
Yeah, but don't you remember back in the day, you thought you were a wizard when you could work out a Mears calculator?
yeah, spinning it on the
Spinning
dials.
it all
yeah.
around, and number of outside walls,
Yeah.
and insulated. and-
Looking back, it was a good way of quickly working out roughly what you needed. But if we go, obviously buildings have got much more insulated since that point as well. So the Mears calculator would be probably out by 70% now, but 20 years ago it wouldn't have been so far, as the drive for more insulation has
I
happened.
wonder how many Mears calculators there still are on desks and in desk drawers.
My dad still has one.
Does he?
Yeah,
Hopefully not very many based on that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Particularly if you specify an air source heat pump, otherwise you're
Well,
going
yeah,
it's
you're
going to kill
done
you.
there.
Isn't it, that one?
Yeah, I don't think there's many engineers even use
There
them now,
wouldn't be
are there?
many know how
No.
to use them nowadays.
Right, that's good. Yeah. It's a proper blast from the past, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
I didn't think I was coming on here talking smock coats and
No,
Mears calculators.
You've caught me with that one, Paul. to be fair.
Why don't you remember them?
No,
Well, you probably won't. If you
I'm-
came in
I'm-
2009.
I'm nearly 50, Paul. So,
Yeah, but 2009, I'm talking...
but I was in the business earlier than that. But most of what I was doing in the business was collecting parcels, putting them in the back of a van, and disappearing.
not bodging heat losses with Mears
I,
like me and Jim.
I
and John.
wasn't bodging heat losses at that point, but no. But and I also wasn't disappearing in one of those coats to deliver products to people either. I had a bit more street cred than that.
Do you imagine if you pulled up and got out of your van wearing one of those, a white jacket?
Yeah.
Someone's going to take me away
Take me
somewhere.
away. It's a padded van. Come
Yeah,
on.
exactly.
It's all the service that Tuplin's offer. We'll take away your...
You could do with the padded cell room every now and again, Paul. That's another conversation.
Oh dear. Right, back to air source heat pumps. This is for... Who answered that last one? Oh, it was Jim. So this is for Tim.
Okay.
Air source heat pumps only work well in warm weather.
No, that's inaccurate. So we'll debunk that myth. Again, it comes down to how it's designed, fabric first, how well the property's insulated. I think the simple bullet point is if the property's losing heat, then it won't work well. And then you get into the electricity gas conversation, with electricity being more than gas. 3 to 1, maybe coming out of
that's
2 to
similar,
1.
yeah.
So you will have more demand through a cold period in a typical British winter. But when they're designed, and just not speaking on the behalf of the manufacturer we partner with, all manufacturers will design based on a geographical area average outside temperature. So it's designed to be able to get a room, particularly when there's an underfloor heating system. It'll be designed that, even at a -3 external air temperature, with that type of heat emitter, you will be able to get a room to 20, 21 degrees. Now, these are comfortable room temperatures. So I think we can debunk that myth. It works all year round.
Yep.
But there's got to be an understanding and an education piece for the consumer to understand how it does work.
Different.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that thought around educating the consumer about how the heating works in a minute. This one's especially for Jim. Air source heat pumps only work with underfloor heating.
Not true at all, no. It probably works slightly better with underfloor heating because you can run at lower flow temperatures because you're taking the mass of a floor, heating that up, and then you've got an emitter. But it will work with radiators, no problem at all, providing it's sized accordingly. But generally, people are designing radiators to about 40 to 45 degrees flow temperature. With underfloor heating, you can see it as low as 30, 35. So the lower the flow temperature, the more efficient the heat pump is, essentially.
Does that mean we're seeing more underfloor heating upstairs?
It's starting
now,
to become more popular, yes.
rather than that traditional mix
Yeah.
of
There's
underfloor
still-
downstairs and
I would say still 60 to 70% is traditional underfloor downstairs radiators upstairs.
even with
with a heat pump.
Yeah.
But it's definitely starting to become more popular upstairs If you'd have asked me that 10 years ago, it would have probably been 90% downstairs, 10% upstairs.
It used to be a big thing with kitchen installs as well, didn't it? So if you had a new kitchen, it was natural to have underfloor heating
Yeah.
with it as well, because that's the functioning room in a
is.
normal family.
Yeah.
It's where everybody congregates. So underfloor heating just was a
Especially
follow on
as,
from a kitchen install.
Yeah, especially as designs have changed and open plans become a thing. So in an open plan space, radiators can be pretty hard to size because you're heating a big area, and a lot of the time now you've not got much wall space to fit the radiator. So underfloor is a more efficient way of heating that space, and it's more comfortable as well.
Yeah.
And you can actually run at lower temperatures in the room. So 21 has generally been the common temperature people like for a heating system. With radiators, the issue you've got is heat rises, goes across the top of the ceiling and drops. So if your thermostat's at the other side of the room, it might be 19 over there and 23 at the other side of the room. Because underfloor heating's spread across a larger area, a lot of people are actually finding they can run at less than 21 and find it comfortable.
Yeah.
So a lot of underfloor heating systems, they're 19, 20 degrees. And people are comfortable at that, whereas if they put a radiator in the same room, they put 21 because you've got to account for that heat
Drop.
transfer and drop.
Yeah. Okay. Spot on. That's good. Right, that's 6 myths thoroughly and utterly smashed and debunked.
Hopefully, yeah.
Good
But,
stuff.
but a common theme amongst all of those, Paul, that it's education, isn't it?
Yeah.
And talking to customers and
Yeah.
driving them back to the independent merchant, have the conversation with someone, and then working with a supply partner who can help unpick all of
All
those
those
bits
things.
and bobs with it.
Because actually, the answers to them are all dead simple, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're not. There's no. I said at the start we were going to talk about the dark arts of air source heat pumps. Well, there's not a lot of dark
No,
art
there's not.
there's
to
not.
that, is it?
No.
And there's, it's not new technology, is it? As we've
Well,
learned
as
from,
we
should
learned
say.
from
where
yeah.
you caught us out
Yeah.
from
When
the,
was it?
Was
the
it
Koreans and the
1855?
Austrians.
1855.
Yeah.
Peter von Rittinger.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
like
Exactly.
169 years.
Excellent.
For me, it'll always be the Romans.
Yeah, it was.
It was always the Romans.
We're going to have to write every single
Yeah,
book on
yeah.
underfloor
Rewrite it
heating
all.
now, yeah.
I don't care what AI says.
Just be careful what you say. We don't want any international incidents because you're decrying Korea.
I think, in all seriousness, though, air source heat pumps are. There is nothing to be scared about them.
No.
Whilst it's very much new technology, ultimately, what an air source heat pump is it drags air from outside and it forces it through a very, very, very tiny gap. And it's a little bit like if you get a bicycle pump and put your finger over the end of the bicycle pump and try and push it, you'll burn the end of the finger. And that's exactly what an air source heat pump does.
I wish you'd said this before. I'd have brought a pump in and had you pumping your
But
pump.
you're right.
That is why I never told you, because I knew
You could see what was happening.
Live
we would
demo.
always sat in here with bicycle pumps, and everybody would be looking, thinking, "What on earth has bicycle pumps got to do with air source heat pumps?"
Well, you know what? If we invite you back again for a third visit, I'm bringing a pump.
No.
Technically, it's a fridge in reverse. It does the exact opposite to a fridge, which
Yeah.
compresses the heat but pushes it out, whereas this brings it in. It does the exact same.
And when we started thinking about doing this, we talked about the technical side of things and how technical should we get, and
And we didn't want to get too tight.
No.
because we've got a really mixed audience, so we thought we wouldn't try and kill it in one day. We'd try and keep it at eye level. So we said what we'd then move on to after we'd done the myth busting was that we'd have a look at. I'd get you to talk about some of the high level technicalities relating to an end user, consumer, and to the trade.
Yeah.
So we'll do that, and we'll go on to we'll start with the end user, but we'll move to it via another myth that I thought about.
Okay.
Whilst you were all talking.
Okay.
So via this myth that I hope you can bust.
Go on.
You better do, otherwise this next bit's going to be a mess. You can then move on to the technicality, some of the high level technicalities behind it. So myth number 7, you can't retrofit an air source heat pump to an existing property.
Okay. Both of us will both
Yeah.
say this one. Do you want to do the technical bit and I'll do the
Go on.
consumer bit?
Yeah.
The way I always see this, because I get asked this regularly, is that if your mindset is such as a consumer or an end user that you want to put renewable energy in because you're embracing the whole green, carbon neutral movement, then you can make it work. You are going to have to face in a pre-1990s property where your insulation's not to a current building reg standard. You are going to have to take on board the fact that there's other work you will have to do before you can actually put a heat pump in. Absolutely. You would not just normally, if we received a set of plans or any particular job, On a 1960s, 70s, 80s build, the first question we're asking the contractor is, what's the plan for insulation? What are you doing? And then genuinely, because you're doing a consultancy piece, if there's no plan for it and someone's trying to do it, all you can then do is talk them through the failings, not the product and how it works, but the fact it won't be as efficient as you want it to be. But you can't, you shouldn't carte blanche just say you can't address that. You can do it. There's just a lot of other things you've got to bring into the mix.
Okay. And so if it was a 1960s terraced house, probably single skin,
Single skin.
that's a problem, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a problem.
Unless you're going to externally.
Which is typical of a lot of the UK housing stock, which is the wider conversations you hear in political circles and the government right now. We've got an ageing housing stock and targets on new build and everything else that we're doing. And then when you compare with where heat pumps have grown more, perhaps in Europe, and we go back to what we discussed before about temperatures and not working in winters. Well, the 2 or 3 places that are most popular are the Nordic
really
nations
cold
and
places.
Scandinavian.
Yeah.
So what did they do differently to our country when it was building property? Because they built property 60, 70 years ago as well. So you can get around all that. You can debunk that myth. You've just got to have a different conversation.
Okay. So probably a 1960s terrace house single skin is probably, you're not going to probably do that, because to externally insulate or internally insulate,
Not without further investment.
It's going to be a big issue, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But say it's a late 80s, early 90s house, cavity wall, probably insulated to some degree or other. That's very doable.
Yes.
Yeah, you just get your heat loss calcs done. Whatever you need to do, whoever's involved in that process and wherever you're buying the product from, the mix is available at the end user.
Yeah.
To make sure you do all the predetermine whether you can or cannot do it.
How would a consumer understand the level of insulation in the walls, or is that not too important? Is it more important the heat emitter and size of rads than?
I think they're all equally important.
Yeah,
Okay.
You'd agree with that?
I would, yeah. So at the end of the day, the more insulation you have, the less heat you have to put into the building to replace the heat that's been lost. So if you like you were saying, Paul, in 80s, 90s, cavity build insulation, if there's any form of insulation within that cavity, you're generally going to be okay. The thing I would think you're most likely to look out for is the pipe sizing. But this is where the MCS accreditation and things like that comes in, because for MCS, you have to have a full heat loss done, and they would actually look at the pipe sizing, determine if it needs to be upgraded. So, yeah, it's not so much of an issue in a property like that. You can do things to help it, change to triple glazing, insulated plasterboard, things like that would make a huge difference.
Yeah.
But you not essentially have to do it.
Are you seeing much individual consumer retrofitting?
That's a good question, Paul, because when you look at it, we do see a fair bit of it.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is driven, and Jim will agree with me on this, because we discuss this every day. It's driven by what somebody wants the heat emitter to be.
Yeah.
Because if they're refurbishing a property and they actually do want it, and the number one priority is we want a wet underfloor heating system, then you get to talk about the heat source, because they've got a better chance of it working because we've got lower temperatures. Mm-hmm. In its most basic form, an underfloor heating system is an underfloor radiator, but there's a pipe in a much bigger surface area. So lower temperatures, you can work with heat pumps. So we do see it. Is it more difficult retrofit? Absolutely, it is. But we do see quite a good volume of it. And also, we're going to have to accept as, sellers of this type of, vendors of this type of products, that our housing stock is such that we're not just going to be selling heat pumps to new builds. There are people that want to take advantage of the fact that there's £7,500 available. Yeah. To do something. Okay. And we'll come on to that a little bit. I know we will in a minute.
I've got a great example of that, a project we worked on in Newcastle, 3-bed end terrace. I was there 6-7 weeks ago. All installed, underfloor heating downstairs, radiators upstairs. We were there just to set a few things up, just help the customer out. And we looked at the efficiency on the heat pump, and it was a SCOP, so a seasonal coefficient of performance of 5.17, I think it was, which means it's 517% efficient. And that was 6-7 weeks ago when we had the cold snap in January.
And that was end terraced.
End terrace, yeah. He didn't put any extra insulation on the external walls. There were cavity, but no insulation in the cavity. And yeah, it was pumping out as good efficiency as I've ever
So
seen.
what had made that efficient? So to me, that sounds a bit counterintuitive that you've not upgraded the insulation. So to
So-
achieve 500% must be to do with the
performance
emitter.
of the heat pump and the emitters. So the emitters would be sized accordingly. So
interesting.
we'd done the underfloor heating downstairs as an overlay system. Didn't want to do it upstairs, and that's fair enough. So the radiators were sized to be able to run at minus 3.8, I think it was, something like that. Would have been in Newcastle, and it got vertical rads as well, which notoriously give less heat. And it was a comfortable 20 degrees in there.
Okay. So that was virtually worst case scenario, wasn't it? End terrace.
You could have got
cavity
you
with
could
no
have got
insulation.
worse with no insulation and stone builds or solid walls.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was one of those where it was on the borderline of being able to do it.
Excellent.
And yeah, that was MCS accredited. He got his £7,500
Yeah.
off the government, and it's working at that level of efficiency.
It's another reason, though, why commercial premises won't look at air source because of the heat loss element in a commercial property. I know Nick looked at it for our business when we were looking at solar panels on roofs, and there was just too much heat loss, and we wouldn't have never got the
I
benefit
think
of it.
the thing with that, I think sometimes the heat loss is a little bit over the top because they're taking into account the height of the building.
Yeah.
So we've got a project on in Lancashire at the moment, which is about 1,000 square metre car garage. It's basically a barn in the bottom of a valley. That's got 3 16 kilowatt heat pumps on it, and it'll run perfectly fine at that.
So with fuel prices going through, excuse the pun, going through the roof at the minute as well, everybody's looking at an option of an air source
They are.
heat pump
They are, the technology
to save some money.
The technology, the things you forget. There's two things that spring. Listening to Tim talk about that, the manufacturers, the technology is improving all the time.
Of course, yeah.
Well, regardless of what we need to do to achieve what we want to achieve, the technology is improving.
The product's getting better.
Product's getting better.
Yeah.
I always learnt this as a manufacturer's distributor. No manufacturer's manufacturing something that doesn't work.
Yeah.
It comes out in an education installation every time.
Okay. So keeping with that theme of the technicals around the end user retrofitty kind of stuff, we're going to talk about grants, but you kind of touched on that. £7,500
Yeah.
is available, fitted by MCS
Yeah.
accredited. So anything else to add on the grant side of things?
No, not really. Again, it just comes down to the fact that if someone's doing a refurbishment, the whole idea of the boiler upgrade scheme is to ensure that if someone wants to put an air source heat pump in or renewable heat source, it applies to ground source as well, but typically air source is where we're getting most of the traction. If that consumer wants to do that, the grant's available to them, and the government is incentivising them to do it to move away from fossil fuels. But it's basically on those projects where it's a self-build or they genuinely are wanting to upgrade from a boiler. So there's obviously the market gets a little bit of misunderstanding there, because if it's a developer new build contractor, well, they're going to sell the property for a certain price. So it's not available to that particular person. So it's more geared up, and that's £7,500. And this is key for me, it's really a case of that will cover invariably, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, the cost of the product. Your cylinder, the bits and bobs you need with it, let's not get over technical, but your cylinder, your pump and everything else, you're going to cover the cost of it. You've still got to pay for the installation.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
It's not something
It's not
for nothing.
totally free.
Yeah, I have heard of instances where they've actually been cheaper to fit because of the grant, and it would have been replacing a boiler. So it's exceptional circumstances. They've gone into the property, the pipe sizing's been big enough, the radiators have been big enough, so it's a straight swap. So I have had instances where they've made money and got the install as well in the product.
I think it's also, I've noticed a couple of conversations I've had certainly with our P&H managers, is that builders, etc., trying to get a grant without an MCS accreditation. And that can't happen. They won't release the funding without the MCS accreditation. So that's an important one.
The other thing we were going to talk about when it comes to end user, and you touched on it a bit ago, Tim, was the impact on heating lifestyle. So how it heats.
Yeah.
Touch on that for us.
Well, again, Jim and I discussed this just yesterday on a big job that we're doing in South Manchester, but the lifestyle is what you expect from it, and how that heat emitter works, and what temperature you want a room to be at, and everything else that goes with it. And it comes down to floor coverings and, my feet are warm. Okay, well, your feet will be warm more warm, if you like, on a porcelain tile. But that's an underfloor system with a heat pump. So the whole heat emitter comes into it again, because that lifestyle is, well, what floor covering are you having? How are you heating it? How are you controlling the temperature in your property? And actually, what's your expectation? And it comes down to the emitter a lot, because if people stand near a radiator, it's really warm. If you go into a room that's got underfloor heating in it, you've got a consistent heat across the whole room. So again, it unfortunately comes back to that word again, expectation.
Oh, it's change, isn't it?
Education, change. What's my perception of how this is going to be and everything.
One
else,
of the things as well, a lot of people expect to run it the same way with the boiler. So it'll come on for a couple of hours in the morning, off all day, then on from 5 till 10. A heat pump won't work efficiently that way. It'll work that way, but not efficiently. So the idea is to run it a much longer period, so you're balancing out that temperature, and then there's no real fluctuation between temperature in the property. It makes it much more efficient. It's better for the heat pump's lifespan, because you're not reacting quickly. You're running at 100% back down to 100 0. You're running at it works fast initially, but then it slows itself down and just maintains a
So in
constant
terms
temperature.
of what we used to having in most of the houses is walking in, it's freezing cold, whack the heating on, too hot, windows windows open, cool it down. It's just constant in the
It is, yeah, and a lot of people think, well, if it's going to be running longer, it's going to cost me a lot more, but that's not necessarily the case, because that first hour, it'll be pulling a lot of electric from the grid, but once it's got the temperature it needs, it's just trickling. So you've virtually no electric there.
That control is really topical, Paul, in the industry as well at the moment. If you look at a lot of the purists on LinkedIn, you get the people that the people that advertise whether retrofits work talk about. There's an acceptance that within new build heat pump works and everything that goes with it. We talked briefly before about retrofit, and a lot of the purists who are into the market and sustainable installers and so on and so forth talk about the success stories they've had, like Jim's had on the project in Newcastle. But also the expectation is on how you control it. And this is the customer expectation on what's the heat system going to give me. It's quite difficult to put into English, but there's the open loop conversation at the moment, and there's the control. We've discussed this a lot. A lot of air source heat pump engineers will advocate open loop, which basically means the whole ground floor of a property, or even the whole property in its entirety, is just on one control. It's all on or it's all off, and it's running at one temperature. The consumer gets involved with that a little bit, because clearly we all want bedrooms maybe at lower temperatures, or we want a bathroom on in the middle of May when another room's warm. So it's the customer expectation is another part of the education process, really.
Okay. Let's move on to the builder side of things.
Yeah.
And again, some of the technicalities around it. We've touched on some of this. Regulations apply. So I guess what we're talking there is future homes and the eventual demise of gas boilers.
Yeah.
Where's that heading for us?
Well, from my knowledge, if you look at Part L and how this is evolving now, we're in a situation where I appreciate governments change, but the debt and the date moves. But we're going to get to a point over the next 3-4 years, and there'll be a buffer period at the end of it where we will not be installing gas boilers. If you look at future home standards, you look at Fabric First, and Jim and I got involved with something with the BMF just end of 2023. At the end of the day, we're responsible now as an industry to just drive the installation of non-fossil fuel heat sources. The technology's there. The dates are moving, but we're looking at 2028, 2029 in the most recent publications of when the government, whoever that may be, will turn round to the market and say, you are no longer no longer installing gas boilers.
Is it getting to the point already though where momentum with builders is to fit air source now rather than wait?
From what I see, yes, particularly if you look at our independent merchant client base, which is clearly what we sell to, I would say that the typical customer of that independent merchant is potentially doing 5 to 8 new builds a year, somewhere in that bracket. And I think there's an acceptance now that maybe wasn't there 5 years ago that I need to put air source heat pump in. I need to get my head around how this works. And equally, if you're selling a renewable heat source property, there's an add-on.
Just
we can sell this on.
kudos of it.
Exactly. We can sell this on for, I'm not saying as a premium, but they can sell it on for a price that's commensurate with what the work they've done previously.
The next point we were going to talk about was Part L, which you touched on there. And obviously Part L allows a builder to build in various different ways to achieve Part L.
Yeah.
You could do it predominantly fabric first with some token renewables, or you could use an air source heat pump to play a bigger part and cut back on some of the insulation.
Yeah.
Are you seeing any great shift in that at the minute, or is it every builder different, and some prefer the renewable way, some prefer the fabric first way?
I would say that from my point of view, looking at the type of project we're quoting, that every builder is slightly different on that. But there is a general, and again, we've discussed it, Jim, there is a general feeling and consensus that now we do not get any inquiries now where we're putting underfloor heating in new builds with gas boilers.
Yeah.
I'd say that 95% of the inquiries we get on new build
On new
now,
build, yeah.
For
combines.
they will have an air
systems.
source heat pump.
Yeah.
And we understand the heat emitter needs to work with that particular chosen.
I think
Particularly-
legislation leads us down that road, though, don't they? Because when you're trying to reach a particular SAP calculation, adding a gas boiler to it doesn't tick the box, does it? So legislation forces you down that route, Paul, to a degree, with air source and underfloor.
I was just wondering whether people were starting to move.
Yeah.
There was enough drive behind it for people to start to move before regulation really enforces.
I think there is.
But I guess like anything, it's a big change to how the
it
UK's
is,
heated
and
its houses, isn't it? So it will be slow.
The government haven't helped, to be honest. They've not pushed it as much as they should, but they've recently put an advert in the TV. I've seen it a couple of times now.
Yeah.
That's going to gain a bit more traction because more people understand it, and they've not done much with the boiler upgrade scheme, never really advertised it. So more often than not, it's us advising the client that
push people.
that's available.
I guess the other part of that whole equation is the MCS design and fitting.
That's it.
I guess, I know we could have had this in the myth bit. There aren't enough MCS accredited
Agreed.
installers available. How do you see that right now?
The thing with that, so yeah, there's not that many MCS accredited installers, but there's what you call an MCS umbrella scheme, where an installer will almost charge a fee for his services, do all the work for you, and then he'll sub that work out to a normal installer.
Okay.
So we're seeing quite a bit of that at the minute because it's quite costly to do your MCS. We work with several people on that who help with the umbrella scheme. So
And the
I think
MCS is relatively new within our sector, even though it's not. So it's a case of simplifying it again. The MCS process is a case of which one of those contractors or engineers actually want to have that qualification. I'm sure it can be quite lucrative for them because there's fewer of them available. So if they are available to support an installation, there's real benefit to the industry, but it's still in its infancy. I think from a Part L point of view, I certainly see in new build now that we're definitely on the right path. And I also think that, from your point of view, Paul, with Howes and our point of view at Tuplings, we are responsible for making that happen a little bit.
Helping drive it.
Helping drive it.
Yeah.
definitely.
We should be doing that. We know it's happening, so run with it.
Yeah.
You don't need too much opinion in that. Just get on with it, really.
Yeah,
that's how
I'll
I
bring
see
it.
it.
It's good. I've got one more thing that we had on our list of things to talk about, the technicals. And asked if there's anything else you want to add, we will do before we start wrapping up. But you put this in big bold letters right at the start, the very first one. Leave them alone.
Okay.
Why is that important?
In terms of leaving the heat pumps alone when they're running,
That's
absolutely.
that's what you put.
Yeah, leave them alone was basically, it's a case of if it's installed correctly, we've got the pipe sizings right, we have the heat emitter right, and the insulation is correct, it runs.
Yeah.
It really is that simple. We don't need to be overcomplicating the process.
No.
That's what I meant by it. It only gets really difficult. If people have the perception, again, it's education, turn it off, turn it on, it's going to get more costly.
Yeah.
Let's stop doing that.
Let the heat pump work its magic. I think that's the easiest way to word it. And a lot of people get mixed up because they have weather compensation. So we say it might run at 45 degrees C. It'll only do that on the coldest day. On an average day, 7, 8 degrees, it might only be putting 30 degrees into the radiators. And people will naturally draw to the radiators, touch it, well, it's not working. And then they'll go to the heat pump, mess about with the heat curve, and just leave it. As long as your room's at the temperature you like, forget about the temperature of the radiator or the underfloor heating the floor. That's the key. So people, you need to leave it alone, as we say.
Trust the process.
Trust your room
That's
temperature,
it.
not your emitter temperature.
Okay, that's good.
There's also manufacturers out there now, Paul, that have a device which is fitted to air source heat pumps, whereby the manufacturer can monitor the performance of the air source.
Yeah,
So they can actually tell you,
it was tinkering.
how the system's performing, and they
Yeah.
can even tell you when it's about to fail, if it's about to fail.
Yeah.
So you're safe in the knowledge that it will always continuously run. There'll be no unprompted breakdowns of it.
It did make me laugh when we planned this out. We said we'll have a technical session, and the first point under the technical session was don't touch it. That's almost as good as the IT when your computer's not working. Turn it off, turn it on again. So that's good advice.
I think he's right.
Do you think manufacturers should put that on the front of all the boxes?
No,
Do not touch.
but it's so true, Paul. It's so true. But there's 2 or 3 bullet points that have to support not touching it.
Yeah.
And you have to understand that.
Get it
and
right.
then you're
First,
okay.
and then leave it.
Yeah.
Fine, that's good.
I think it's more telling the kids not to use the device as a goalpost in the back garden,
Yeah, there is that.
because I do no good whatsoever.
That's a good point. Yeah. That's my technical list. Is there anything else you've thought of while we're talking that you want to add in?
No, not really. I think we've covered, heat source, heat emitter, debunked a few myths, and technically, we've covered what we would need to cover. I'm sure if we were sat in here with some MCS contractors and
It
some
would be a different
purists,
conversation.
It'd be a different conversation. But I think we've covered what we need.
But
to.
we've done what we tried to do here and
Yeah, I think
debunked
so.
some of the things
Yeah.
to
Yeah, I
let
think
people understand what's going on.
Yes,
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well done, that was good. I was worried about this one, about how we were going to explain some of this stuff when we started. I think you've done a great job. So brilliant. Right, so to wrap up, we always finish with some quick fire questions.
Right. Okay.
There is eventually going to be a Howard Timber 1840 podcast book where we reproduce all of these words of wisdom.
Okay. Look forward to
So you'll be going into print at some point. Jim, first, the favourite part of your job and the most difficult part of your job?
Favourite parts of variation. I can be dealing with any type of heating system to any type of person, whether it be a homeowner, installer, a merchant. And there's so much variation in it. I enjoy that.
Okay.
And so what was the second
The most
question?
difficult part of your job, or the bit you don't like?
The variation.
So you love the variation.
Yeah,
and hate the
I enjoy
variation.
it, but then it can be difficult because you can go from one conversation to another, and it's trying to factor in the different perspectives of everything. So yeah,
Brilliant. That's
that's
good.
it, really.
That's good. That.
Tim?
The most satisfying, best part of what I do really is getting a grip of a project when I get that initial inquiry, running the course of the inquiry and making sure that the end user, through the merchant, has got exactly what they need at the end of it. Yes, there's a sales process,
Yep.
so we want to sell something to you, but the genuine pleasure out of it is seeing someone achieve something that they wanted to achieve. The most difficult part of it is, we touched on this a little bit, is managing expectation.
Okay.
Doing that education piece, depending on, because however we sell the product, the transactional process is through the merchant. But to get to that point, we get the inquiry from the merchant, we'll talk to an M&E engineer, we'll talk to the plumber, the building contractor, the end user, get that expectation wrapped up into one, which is difficult because you've got a lot of opinion to juggle. But ultimately, if you get the result at the end of it, you're satisfied with everything you've provided.
Brilliant. Do you want another go, bearing in mind you've done this once?
Yeah, no, I just going on what these guys are saying here. I mean, no 2 days are the same, and I think we're quite fortunate enough that we've got a varied working week.
Yeah.
One day we could be doing something else somewhere else, and then the next day we're doing a podcast.
Yeah.
So it's no 2 days are the same.
Most difficult bit, or the bit you don't like?
People that don't see my point of view.
Can you just clarify why you're looking at me when you say that?
No,
Not for real.
I should have looked on the floor. Really, shouldn't I?
Right, Jim, this is coming to you quick before he elaborates. What's the most crucial characteristic or skill you need to work in sales?
I think you've got to be robust. You've got to be able to take the negatives. You're not going to win everything. You're going to have people trying to drive you down on price. That's part of the job. Don't let it get to you, I think. Just, look at everything as an individual project, I think.
Brilliant, thank you. Tim?
Robust's a really good word. I'd have gone with resilience. You know, but at the end of the day, and there's another R, got 3 R's here, relationships as well. Because once you've got the relationships with people, you've got half a chance.
I'm going to write that down. That's going to be at the front of the book in my introduction to
We're going to go with the 3 R's.
robust resilience and
Yeah.
what was the other one?
You've got to be robust in what we do. We're in a difficult industry, aren't we? We're at the forefront of what the whole market, aren't we? You get an economic downturn, we're at the brunt of it. You get an upturn, we should benefit from it. So
What was the third R that I'm robbing off you?
relationships.
Relationships, that's it.
And he will use it, by
That's
the way.
excellent. Well,
It
hopefully
wasn't purposeful. That
you'll have forgotten it.
just
I'll have
fell
got
out.
Dave to edit it out so I can just pinch it.
This is going to appear in our next category meeting. This
It's
is.
just we'll reference you as it's yours.
Cheers.
John.
Yeah, I think
No, don't. No.
I don't-
You're not having
follow-up.
relationships robust or resilience. I'm afraid.
I know it's a bit of a cliche, but people deal with people, don't they? And I know it's a cliche, but I've always found that is the case, and people trust you because you do what you say you're going to do.
Yeah.
You don't tell lies. You don't try and lead them down a garden path to nowhere, and you do you carry out what you told them that you were going to do.
Brilliant. Is that the same as you said last time?
No,
I'm not going to check.
can't remember now. No. But it's true. I have so many.
Yeah, but it's spot on, that. Yeah, it's spot on.
Creep. Stop it, for God's sake. Right, Jim, back to you. Final one. This is the final one for you all. We're nearly there.
Okay.
The best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I think just get on with it. Don't focus on the negative. Focus on the positive. Just you're here to make a difference. I think.
Very good.
Yeah.
Tim?
I give my dad credit for this, actually. You said you're going to ring them back at 4 p.m. Ring them back at 4 p.m. Even if you've got nothing to tell them when you ring them back at 4 p.m.
Yeah.
Stuck.
Excellent.
Because that's the only way you're going to get a relationship.
And do you know what? It's that kind of little gem that we asked this question for
That's stuck in my head.
at the end.
And I preach that all the time, to the point where I know, and Jim knows, and he's smiling now,
He's
and I
tittering
can't
away,
see
isn't
it.
he?
He knows that the team around us, because we've got a great team in the office, someone who's come through an apprenticeship, someone who's from a national merchant background, someone who's come from a retail background into our logistics, got a diverse group of people. I go on about that all the time. And I know they take it on board, but I also know when I close the office door, they go, oh God, he's going on about it. But I believe in that. I believe in that.
Trust the process.
Trust that. Absolutely.
And to finish off,
I think you're never ever going to deliver a false promise. So just like I was just saying a minute ago, just be honest with people. If you can't do it, tell them you can't do it, or be realistic on a return date. So yeah, just be honest and upfront with people.
brilliant.
Stood me in good stead for 40 odd years.
40.
Yeah.
You don't look old enough, John.
No, I know I don't.
Solid advice, that, John. Really
Yeah.
solid advice.
On that point, we're going to stop. Thank you for coming on for your
you.
second appearance.
Yeah, thank you. I've enjoyed it.
What's your next one going to be?
Well, I don't know. Gavin was here earlier on saying to me, you ever thought about hosting one yourself? And
Oh, so I.
That's
That's somebody else
Yeah.
trying to take my job.
else. Yeah.
Do you know what? When we started this, nobody was interested. Now all of a sudden, can I do that? And
Yeah.
I'm thinking, well, what am I going to do?
Well, we'll see.
We might swap seats and you can,
We'll see.
you can come
If
and
Alex
interview
Maud
me.
can do it, anybody can do it.
I don't think he meant that as an insult, Alex. Tim, Jim, thank you.
Paul, thanks
Thanks for bringing this to life.
No, it's
because
been a pleasure. Thank you.
we talked about doing something around renewables, and we were like, oh, who would we trust to have a conversation that makes sense and is entertaining enough to make it enjoyable listening. I think he's done a great job. It's been a pleasure plotting it out and planning it out. I can't believe I've been talking to you, Tim, for ages without knowing that it was your business, which I was incredibly embarrassed about.
Well,
you should shout about it more.
Yeah, we're trying to do that, but we're still a growing business, so we'll do more of that stuff.
But you've got a great business.
Thank you.
know, we enjoy working with you. You did really well at the Fortis Awards recently, and you won 2 awards, wasn't it? Ross won
Yeah,
an
absolutely.
award and the Business
Yeah.
Run Awards. So you're clearly doing some really good stuff. It has been a pleasure. You've got loads of experience. You've made it entertaining. We've had some smiles. White coats, me as calculators.
Absolutely.
That's what I'm going to call the. I think that's what we'll call it. White coats and me as calculators.
White coats and me as
Jim's
calculators.
he's
I like
taken me.
that.
He's taken me back in time. So
Yeah.
thank you both for coming.
Been a
To our
pleasure.
audience, thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. Look out for more episodes to come. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please like and subscribe, and tell everybody who you know, who you think might be interested in the podcast, to come and have a listen. You'll learn some stuff, and hopefully between us we'll make you smile. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you again in the future. Bye-bye.
Bye.